Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here is your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning. Welcome back to, or welcome for the first time to Faith in Our Hometown. On this show, we try to discuss issues of faith and culture as they surround us here in the Joplin area and how those impact our lives. One of the shows that we have done that people seem to enjoy a great deal is a show that we call How Do We Differ, or How Are We the Same? And in those shows, we have talked to different people of different denominations, different belief systems. Some of the input we've received from doing some of those other shows was that somebody said, sometime, Father Jay, I really wish that you talk to somebody who's an atheist. I don't know what that's about. And sometimes the people that I've heard of are, I don't know what to think of them. So I went out and found a real live atheist to join me today. With me is Dave Barwick. And Dave got dragged to church by his fiancée, Mary. And that's how we met. So I'm going to talk to Dave in a few minutes about what it's like to be an atheist. We'll be right back after this Mercy Minute.
I think it's important to see the plastic surgeon beforehand, so that way you know what the options are in terms of reconstruction, whether it's one breast or both breasts, or whether if they opt for what's called conservative therapy, if you have a lumpectomy and radiation, what are your options after that? So I think it just empowers women to have more information to decide what's the best decision for them moving forward. Some of the pluses about immediate reconstruction are that you, for the most part, have one less surgery, and also psychologically, a lot of women just love knowing that they've already started the healing process.
Well, welcome back. I'm here this morning with Dave Barwick. David, thank you for joining me this morning, and thank you for coming for the conversation. When somebody said, well, why can you talk to somebody like perhaps who believes that there isn't something out there, you were the first person I thought of, because I always enjoy our conversations, I enjoy our visits. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about how you came to this belief or non-belief, however you want to define it,
Sure. So I was raised in an evangelical church, so Protestant denomination, and I went there. I was baptized when I was 11, and I was involved, sincere, devoted believer from the time I was very young until I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
And when I was in my late 20s, I decided I really wanted to reinvest myself in my faith. So I wanted to really study theology. I wanted to study church doctrine, the history of the church, apologetics, things like, questions like, why I believe that the Bible is God's word.
Right.
Why do I think that? Where did that come from?
Right.
Right. And so I wanted to be able to maybe evangelize to someone who was unaffiliated.
Sure.
And let's say that person was also at the same time being evangelized to by a Mormon or a Muslim or someone. I wanted to be able to say, well, hey, here are the reasons why those guys are wrong, and we're right over here. So you wanna come over here into this camp. So I started doing this, started reading and listening and investing in almost exclusively just Christian resources. And what I found though was when I started finding answers to questions like the history of the church, or arguments for belief in God, or for the Christian God in particular, is I thought, well, is this what all there is? I wasn't. I was surprised that I didn't find those arguments and reasons that compelling.
Right.
And I went into this with total expectation that there would be really, really good, strong arguments and evidence, right?
Sure.
So I wasn't afraid to place my faith under absolute scrutiny, because I thought it'll stand up to any scrutiny that I can muster.
Well, one of the things I always tell my students is when they start, when they get on this whole kick about, this is what I believe in, I say, well, but you've at least got to investigate the arguments from atheism if you're going to tell me you're a theist. I mean,
Sure.
how do you know what you've chosen if you've not done that? So, I mean, I worked with lots of people, you know, doing that exact same track and thing that you did. Some of them with, you know, some of them interesting results. Yours has been one of the most interesting of, you know, somebody that I've talked to that has done some of that. So what did you discover? Where'd you come down on that whole thing?
Well, you know, at the same time I was studying the Christian resources, I was also familiarizing myself with arguments against the belief in God, or criticisms of the arguments for the belief in God, or criticisms of Christianity, because that's what you do with apologetics, right? You have to know the counter arguments so you can interact with them effectively. And I found, well, I actually think that those are pretty good arguments. I thought, well, how can that be? So over the course of a little over a year, I really struggled. It was a real personal crisis that I didn't want to lose my belief in God. And so I had this unwilling transition. And during it all, I was still continuing to study, and I was reading the Bible, and I was praying. And I was saying, okay, God, yeah, you're going to have to give me something here. Just give me just even some reason just to stay where I am. And so I continued searching in anticipation of finding that. But what finally happened was that one day I was able to, or essentially forced to admit to myself out loud, I don't believe this anymore. You know, and it started with just kind of doubting the particular claims of Christianity, to then doubting whether there was a God at all, and then finally saying, no, I don't think that there is.
Yeah. Well, and again, this morning's not about my trying to convince you otherwise.
Oh, sure.
You know, and we've had some of these conversations, and certainly had the invitation to say, well, let's talk about whatever we want to talk about within that context. But I mean, that just sounds so foreign, probably just to the ears of so many of our viewers.
Right.
You know, there's just like, well, I was forced to conclude that I reject some of those claims. So, like, what were some of those? You know, what were some of the ones that kind of led you to just finally say, I can't go there anymore?
Well, in particular, the problem of evil was a big one for me. I also think that some of the supposed properties of God are contradictory to bedrock knowledge that we all have.
So say something more about that. What? Give me an example.
Okay, like, now this is about to get really technical. It's just going to go crazy. So,
you're the one talking. Go for it.
So, well, before we go into that, I want to say something about, you said you're not here to convince me. I am not here to step on anybody's toes either. But just in the mere expression of my views is probably going to be offensive to someone and scary and threatening. And so one of the things really the reason that I'm here is to try to demonstrate to people that it doesn't have to be threatening. We're not arguing, we're not fighting. You're not going to come away from this going, I don't believe in God anymore, right? And that's not what I'm out to do.
Exactly, and that's the same reason I'm sitting here with you this morning. It's, again, one of the tenets of why we do this show, is we just need to figure out how we can still find some common ground, how we can hear each other, how can we appreciate somebody from a different viewpoint, even if we disagree with them. You know, because I mean, obviously, you know, I think it's a giveaway that I'm kind of a believer.
Right.
Okay, you know, it's just the way it works. I mean, you've been to church enough with Mary to know, you know, you've heard me, and I love the fact that you still come with her, even though, I mean, you know, you've been, you know, that's fine. Belief is one of those things that I believe people just have to. You either believe or you don't believe. I mean, that's really, truly, what we would call faith. And at this point in time, you know, you're just saying that you came to a point where you just said, I don't have faith in, you know, this higher power or this other being, you know, something that we would typically label as God, and you came to that spot. And so just again, by your sharing with our viewers and with me how you got to that spot, again, I'm not finding it offensive at all, you know. Sure. Now again, from within my belief, and you'll smile when I say this, I know, I believe that if there is something afterwards, okay? If there is something beyond this life, which I believe that there is, and I believe, you know, that I believe at that point in time, yeah, you probably will meet Jesus again, and Jesus is going to look at you going, I was trying to say this to you the whole time. What happened? And if you're confronted with that, I think I know you well enough to know that you're going to go, oh, okay, yeah, well, all right. And, you know, and that's going to be, it'll be okay. But at the same time, when you come to this spot in your life where you really truly do have to decide, do I believe this or do I not believe this? You just came to that spot where you said, I just don't think I can believe,
Sure.
what traditionally I believed prior to this, because of your inquiries, because of where you've come down to that. And you made a judgment in that regard. And again, I'm not here to beat you up for it. I'm just, part of the whole show is so that we can figure out, how folks, because many people have never even talked to someone,
Right.
Who's an atheist before, who's admitted it or said some of those things. Because
Yeah.
most people will just say, most people take the branch of agnosticism. All right, I know there may be something out there, but I don't know what I could say about it. I don't know what, since I don't know what to do with it, I'm just gonna toss it up and say, I don't know. All right. Whereas you, from your viewpoint, it's just said, okay, I've examined this, and now I've decided. I think there's not something there. Not something that that is. That I don't think that there's a higher being. I don't think there's a higher power. I don't think there's something out there. And so you were getting. That's where we were when when I said, so what so what kind of, again, what were some of those things that led you to that spot?
Well, one of the questions that I found myself confronting when I was in that journey was, how would someone who is not a believer, how would I distinguish what you call God from something you're just imagining?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that, I really don't know how a believer would answer that question. And even as a believer, I didn't know how I would just, I have this kind of warm feeling inside, right? But so do people of these other faiths.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't think that was a compelling reason in and of itself to argue for my particular religion,
It was no proof to
Right.
you of God's existence.
Sure, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and I'm just going to say this as an aside. I don't believe anybody can prove to anybody else that God exists. I don't, we got all these philosophical arguments, and I studied them all and did all that stuff. But I don't think anybody can prove to anybody else that God exists. I don't
No,
think
and
it
by
can
the
be
same
proven.
token, it's notoriously difficult to prove a negative.
Sure.
Right?
And it's
so
okay.
The
that's
question
why-
is,
yeah.
is it reasonably plausible to believe that these arguments or this evidence points to this one thing?
Right. Okay.
And so, of course, and then one of my issues is, even if I were to accept, say, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, or something like this, even if I said, okay, that's actually true, I'd still have to imagine that God. What other way would I have to meaningfully interact with that God other than to employ my imagination? So, these,
Yeah.
that, among many other things, those are kind of questions that.
Well, and I think that in some ways now, I will say that I think that is a spot where, in terms of, the force of Star Wars or, whatever, in terms of those things, when we are in that position where God is totally other and totally out there, we do have a much harder time, connecting with that without using imagination, without using poetry, without using music, without using some of those things, because where else are we going to hang some of that except on what our own experiences told us from within as well. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly, that when I'm just trying to do the outside, to do that. So at any rate, we're going to pick up with that in just a minute, but right now this is Faith in Our Hometown.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, welcome back. My guest today is David Barwick. David is a friend of mine, an atheist. We were talking a little bit about what we got in common and where we just are going to miss each other. Okay? So we've been talking a little bit about the God that's out there somewhere. Now, in Christianity, of course, we've also got this God, as Christians believe, a God who then comes incarnate. Now, we're not the only religion that believes in an incarnate God, but this is certainly the one that most Christians, in our area especially, are going to recognize. that God became flesh and God came to the earth and lived. So not only are you having trouble connecting with the God that's out there, but you have trouble connecting with that Jesus of of history, or the Christ of faith that people will argue with. Where do you come down on that one?
Well, as far as a historical Jesus, right there, I would claim agnosticism. From my view, if there was a historical Jesus, he was a man. And so, just like any other man in history, like, let's say we found out someday that Julius Caesar didn't actually exist. Well, that's philosophically inert, right? If I think that he exists or did, it doesn't have a big impact on my life. So probably I think there was a historical Jesus, but I don't really consider that to be an important question.
Okay, sure.
Now the idea of the Trinity, that I think, I have a big problem with that, of course, because that's just a contradiction, right? To say that God is three and one. Now one of the things that at least I think
Contradiction or mystery.
I was just going to say that, right?
I know,
at least in Catholicism, you express it as a mystery. You just say, hey, we're not going to try to lay down any fancy arguments on this one. That's a mystery.
Oh, we can lay down all kinds of fancy arguments. I mean, trust me, you can take whole classes on, Trinitarian theology. But again, I don't know that is where, in real life where people live. I mean, Catholicism can be such a heady thing, and we've written books about everything because, our head's in the game, or as I'm fond of saying, you don't have to park your brain at the door. But by the same token, does it really prove anything? And I'm going to say, no. I mean, I can talk about the Trinity till till I'm, my fingers won't write anymore, till my voice gives out. But will that really prove to somebody that there is a Trinity? Okay, I don't think so. I think, if we come to believe in it, then we try to figure out how do we relate to it? How do we do some of those things, okay? But I don't think it's going to prove it to somebody, whatever I can do there. But for you, let's shift gears for a second here. What do you believe in?
Well, that's a really good question, because if you know that someone is an atheist, you know almost nothing about them, right? You just know that there's this one thing that they don't buy.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I've come to know you, as a person and as a good guy, and I really like you, and we've had dinner together and all that kind of stuff, and I love that. I mean, I like you. So I mean, but you're right. If that's one little adjective that describes you. So yeah, I don't know much about you, and I mean, that's why I really appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation, because I don't want everybody in Joplin to go, that's the atheist. Okay,
Well, that's I can't speak for all atheists, because there's really nothing that unites atheists, right? There's no shared confession. There's no positive doctrinal statement. So it could be lots of different things, but. I mean, when I was a Christian, I thought, why would anyone be an atheist? I really naively thought that they were probably these depraved, depressed, sad people who thought everything was meaningless and had short, unhappy lives, right? But no, I mean, functionally, little has changed for me. I'm still the same happy individual that I was, and I'm just trying to navigate to the high points of life like anybody else, I'm just not guided in that by religion.
Okay.
And I think really most of us share, in a general way, we kind of share the same kind of decision-making paradigms, right? We're all just kind of trying to apprehend the best way to live life and then do that.
Right.
And we largely identify the same factors in reality that guide us. If you want to do X, you have to do this over here. So yeah, I mean, I still think life is meaningful. I still think there's right and wrong. It took me a while to try to figure out why I think those things still exist, because I used to just think, well, God says so, and that's it, right? So, but no, I mean, I didn't become a bad person, or it's not like I'm just thinking, oh, well, I can get away with anything now, right? So, yeah, I mean, anybody who's an atheist, they're just a normal person, and they're not anti-theists, right?
I was gonna get to that question, so I'm glad you bring it
Right.
up. So you're not anti-Christian, you're not anti-religion, you're not anti-God. People, I mean, you just don't happen to believe the same thing that I believe.
Right. I was raised in religion. Most of my close friends and all my family, as far as I know, are religious, and they're really good people. And I have a very congenial feeling toward Christians in general. I think there's a better way, right? Obviously, or else
Sure,
I'd be a
or you'd be
Christian.
doing it.
So,
Right.
but there's a distinction there between an atheist and an anti-theist. I met one of Mary's friends one time, and they said, "Well, are you Catholic?" Because they're Catholic, and I said, "No, I'm not Catholic. I'm not a believer." And he said, "Well, what are you then?" To clarify, I said, "I'm an atheist." "Oh, you're against God." "Well, no, I'm not against God. I don't think that there's a God to be against."
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of doing my thing over here, and you're fine to do your thing,
Right.
and we can still get along, and when we
can move
interact.
forward. Yeah. So in terms of when you are pressed with a moral decision to make, what kind of a value system, what kind of belief system do you use to put your decisions together?
Yeah. Well, once I realized that I was an atheist, my worldview was now gone. I saw everything through the lens of Christianity. So now I didn't really have any justification for the things that I still thought must be true, just about reality in general. So I started to study secular philosophy.
Right.
And what I really found that rang true with me was Aristotle and Ayn Rand. They kind of are very similar in terms of their views. And so, yeah, in terms of moral ethics, I think rational egoism, which means I try to do things and everybody should try to do things that further their life in a rational way. Now, that's kind of a buzzword for a lot of people, so I want to say that doesn't mean it's predatory, and it doesn't mean you can't get along, and it doesn't mean that you don't help people out.
Good. Yeah.
So just like anybody, if I were to face some kind of a moral issue, I would try to introspect and examine, okay, what's important here? Aristotle has this idea in the Nicomachean Ethics that every decision you make, every action you take, you cultivate in yourself a moral character, and you're shaping the person that you are. So it's important, even stuff that might seem minor or relatively benign, to take moral decisions seriously, in my view. So, yeah, I would try to examine. Yeah, and it's hard. You have to make up your own mind. I don't have a book or a God that just says, in this case, do this, or here's the rule, you have to do it this way. And obviously, it's not so cut and dry for Christians.
Right.
But
because you put more than even two Catholics in a room, much less two Christians, you're going to wind up with two different answers. In many instances. At least in terms of the way that some of that's nuanced. Sure. So it's not always as easy, but I mean, the way you're describing this is that you have to really work hard at developing that framework for yourself because you don't have a group framework to kind of try to, fit it in.
Right, I can't just collect the inherited view. But practically speaking, I don't think most people really do that anyway. I mean, I think most people, even religious people, still kind of make up their own minds on most matters. And again, another thing, I'm not trying to ingratiate myself with the Catholic Church, but one of the things I appreciate about Catholicism is that its structure allows for change. You can have new ideas come in. You can say, we're going to change this way that we used to do it. And the very fact that there ever have been any changes, or that there or will be, say, okay, we're going to develop this, means that, okay, we were doing it wrong, and we examined that, and now we're going to do it this right way. And I think that most people probably disagree with their religion in small ways, if they were to think about it.
Or at least have some sticking points or something.
Right, or to say, like, even I don't get this. What's up with this?
Yeah.
So yeah, largely everyone is still just trying to make up. In the Bible isn't a roadmap that tells you what to do in every situation.
Right.
So just like anybody, I'm just trying to do the best I can and act thoughtfully.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your honesty with some of that because, again, what I really wanted to accomplish, with everybody this morning is to try to get them to see that you're not like an evil person. You're not like an unreflected person. You've got your way of living life, and those are some conscious choices for you. You don't just wander aimlessly through it. You're making choices based upon value systems and some of those other things. So that sometimes those of us that do grow up with a system or choose the system. Now, again, I do think that there's a necessary thing when you become a grown-up in a faith system. That no longer you're just absorbing the whole thing. Well, that's just because what everybody else did or what they told me to do. But when I'm going to do it, I just appreciate your journey. I appreciate the way that you've made some of those decisions through the years. Even though I wouldn't share all of those same conclusions, I just appreciate the fact that you're willing to come this morning and to share those with all of us. Because I think that there's a lot of misnomers out there about who we are. We're going to be back right after this Mercy Minute.
If you are a smoker, you need to do anything in your power to try to stop smoking because that's probably the biggest risk factor for lung cancer. Ways to help you quit smoking are either using nicotine patches, nicotine gum. There are other medications that your doctor can prescribe to help you quit smoking, such as Wellbutrin or Chantix. There are also smoking cessation programs. We don't know the long-term consequences of e-cigarettes right now, and because of that, they cannot be recommended as a substitute for regular cigarettes. At the end of the day, we would like you to be off of all nicotine products if possible.
Welcome back. While we were on the break, Dave said one more important thing to me, and I'm going to use it as we do our wrap up here. And he said, I really think that it's okay to, examine your own belief system and to examine the belief systems of someone else. Not everybody's going to wind up, becoming an atheist. Not everyone's going to wind up absolutely, just kind of choosing their same thing again. Whenever we examine, whenever we're brave enough to do that, it sometimes winds up being an exploration that will lead us places where we don't always know where we're going to go. But this morning was really about just speaking to somebody from a completely different conclusion about if there's something out there. And I hope that you heard that this morning. It's been a fun conversation talking about how we differ and how we're the same. And so it's been a great way to talk about how we differ. This is Faith in Our Hometown. Thanks for joining us. Come back and see us again next week.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.